In extreme situations, where pain and fear dominate, most surrender. But there are rare moments when the victim does not accept the fate imposed on him. Today, you will discover 3 real and brutal stories, where people who were about to die at the hands of the cartel managed something almost impossible: fighting back. They were untrained, they had no weapons, they were injured, surrounded, without hope. Still, they reacted. These are stories that show that, even in the end, there may still be a chance. Sit back, put on your headphones and join the story. Story number 1, Ecatepec, 2022. Darkness fell over Ecatepec, one of the most violent municipalities in Greater Mexico City. At 10:17 p.m. that Tuesday, Ulises Romero was closing the day at the small mechanical workshop he had run for over 10 years in the same neighborhood. He was known for his honesty and for refusing any involvement with the local underworld, even in a region marked by extortion, disappearances and constant fear. That week, Ulises had received the third veiled threat. It was nothing new that cartel collectors circulated through neighborhood stores collecting the quota, a type of tax imposed by force. Many merchants paid in silence, preferring to keep their families alive. But Ulises resisted, and that bothered him. As he walked towards his truck parked on the sidewalk of a side street, he felt the presence of someone approaching from behind. There were no screams, no chance of reaction. 3 men grabbed him with surgical precision and pushed him into a black car with tinted windows. In less than 10 seconds, he had disappeared from the street as if he had never been there. The journey to the captivity location took about 20 minutes. Ulises, with his head covered by a hood and hands tied, tried to remain calm as the car advanced along routes he could not identify. The smell of gasoline and cigarettes permeated the air in the vehicle. Not a word was said during the journey. When the car finally stopped, Ulises was dragged out and pushed into an abandoned building. The feeling of abandonment was immediate, the air was heavy, permeated with dust and old oil. The place appeared to be an old maintenance warehouse or industrial warehouse. The concrete walls were covered in faded graffiti, and the floor was uneven, stained with oil, dried blood, and rust. Inside, he was forced to sit on an iron chair, tied with reinforced plastic tape around his ankles and wire around his wrists. One of the men adjusted a camera on an improvised tripod, while another organized the environment next to a tool bench. Among screwdrivers, hammers and sledgehammers, rested a large electric saw, its handle still dirty from previous use. The metallic clang of the saw being tested was the first real sound of threat Ulises heard. It was sharp, uneven, as if the engine was old. The performer would turn it on for seconds and turn it off, as if he was calmly preparing the scene. The third man remained silent, leaning against the wall, just watching. His look was not that of an impulsive executioner, but that of someone who did this routinely, as if it were part of a ritual. Ulises tried to keep his mind cool. He already knew what would happen. This was a recording of the execution, a warning that would be spread among merchants in the region, reinforcing the cartel's dominance. The fear was not just of pain, but of exposure. He knew that his image would become a symbol of what happens to those who resist. But, behind the terror, Ulises also analyzed. The chair he was trapped in looked old, with rusty parts. I felt that one of the rear legs was loose, the screws were poorly fixed, almost giving way under the weight. The concrete floor helped, and he began to apply subtle force with his right heel, pressing the structure to loosen without arousing suspicion. On the other side of the warehouse, the 3 men dispersed. One of them left the warehouse to answer a phone call, the other was playing with his cell phone, organizing what appeared to be live broadcasts or sending files. The third, the main executor, was still trying to start the saw, which continually failed, coughing and releasing sparks each time the button was pressed. That break became precious. With discreet movements, Ulises forced the chair leg repeatedly, causing small muffled pops. With every centimeter, he was getting closer to something that he himself couldn't explain. The plastic tape securing her ankles was tight, but a sloppy fold at the back allowed for some play of movement. The wire on the wrists, although firm, pressed against a metal edge of the chair. He rubbed his arm, scratching the skin, breaking layer by layer, until the iron began to tear the wire, millimeter by millimeter. The pain was intense, but at that moment, it was the only possible way. Outside, the man on the phone was laughing. The executor, impatient, kicked the base of the saw trying to make it work. The camera operator seemed distracted, too focused on setting the recording angle. There were more than 20 minutes in a silent game between desperation and strategy. Ulises knew that as soon as the saw worked, there would be no more time. The chair leg finally gave way with a click. The body fell hard against the ground. The noise attracted immediate attention, but the impact had broken part of the ankle tape. Still lying down, with his arms trapped, Ulises rolled over to the tool bench, his fingers searching for something, anything, among the instruments left there. Upon reaching the saw that had been abandoned for seconds, his entire body tensed. He wasn't free yet, but at that moment, the advantage no longer belonged to the executioners. And that night, the role of victim was about to change hands. The cold, dirty floor of the warehouse pressed against Ulises Romero's back as he tried to regain control of his body. His hands were still partially tied, his wrists were bleeding from the constant friction against the wire, and the right side of his face throbbed from the sudden fall. But none of that mattered. He had managed to touch the chainsaw, still turned off, but in his hands. Hearing the crack of the chair breaking, one of the men ran towards him. Ulises felt the weight of footsteps approaching quickly, but he had no time to think. He just turned his body, propelling the saw like an improvised weapon. The direct impact of the metal part against the attacker's knee was enough to knock him to the ground, screaming in pain. It was at that moment that the second man, the person responsible for recording, finally noticed the chaos and tried to run to the exit, but slipped on his own equipment while pulling his cell phone from his pocket. An attempt to warn someone outside failed. Ulises, still with his arms partially restrained, staggered to the bench and picked up a heavy wrench, throwing it with force. The object hit the wall, missing its target, but caused the necessary panic for the man to run away without looking back. The third attacker, who had left to answer a call, returned seconds later, confused, finding the warehouse silent and one of his accomplices lying injured on the floor. Ulises hid behind a pile of old boxes, breathing hard, waiting for the right moment. The man pulled out a gun and started walking slowly, calling out to the other two. The tension inside the warehouse was suffocating. Each step echoed between the concrete walls, and the smell of fuel mixed with sweat and blood filled the air. Ulises was holding a short metal pipe that he found near the wall. He knew he was at a disadvantage, he knew this could be his last chance. When the attacker turned the last column towards the back of the warehouse, Ulises advanced. The blow was brutal, aimed at the hand holding the weapon. The impact ripped off the revolver and the two rolled to the ground in a desperate struggle, where the silence was replaced by muffled grunts and disorganized movements. Ulises got the worst of it at first, hit by a punch in the stomach and another in the face, but he used his elbows to reach the wire that still held him. With one last desperate movement, he turned his body and immobilized his attacker's neck with his arms, squeezing with all the strength he had left. The man resisted for seconds, then stopped moving. The warehouse finally returned to silence. Ulises crawled to the door, still dizzy, bleeding, but conscious. He left the place at the back, passing through a hallway covered in rubble and reaching the back street, where he limped for 3 blocks until he found a house with lights on. The resident, an elderly woman, opened the gate after insistence and muffled screams. Upon seeing the state he was in, she immediately called paramedics. The police arrived shortly after, but there was no one else in the warehouse. The recording equipment had been taken, the attacker's body had disappeared, and the place had been quickly cleaned up. Nothing remained but stains on the concrete and signs of a struggle. In the hospital, Ulises was hospitalized for 9 days. The story was kept confidential, reported to the police only in parts. He said he had been the victim of an attempted kidnapping, but avoided going into details. After being discharged, he disappeared from the city. Rumors say he changed state, assumed another identity and never wanted anything to do with Ecatepec again. Others say he allied himself with a rival group seeking protection. But among traders in the region, its story became legend. Ulises Romero was the man who faced his own execution and lived to tell about it. A reminder that sometimes even victims find a moment of strength enough to turn the tide. And that night, in that forgotten warehouse, the machine that would be used to kill him never worked. Because destiny sometimes prefers silence. Story number 2, Ciudad Juarez, 2021. On June 9, 2021, a house in the eastern sector of Ciudad Juarez was used as a captivity for a woman named Rebecca Salgado. She was not a criminal, she was not known in the underworld, nor did she have debts to any organization. But the surname she bore condemned her. Rebecca was the sister of a young man known as El Mudo, involved in cargo theft and smuggling on small border routes. His brother had been accused of passing on information to a rival cartel about a weapons shipment. Days later, he disappeared. When the cartel men couldn't find him, they went after anyone they could touch. On the morning of the 8th, Rebecca left to go to work like any other day. She never thought she would be followed, she never noticed the two men in the silver car who had been watching her routine for almost a week. When she got off the bus near her house, she was grabbed and pushed into the vehicle. Nobody reacted. In neighborhoods like this, silence was a matter of survival. The captivity was an abandoned house on a dead-end street. The windows were covered with old wood, and inside, the environment was dark, damp and disorganized. The smell of mold and urine permeated every room. Rebecca was taken to the basement, where an old chair had been tied up in the center of the space. Her hands were secured behind the backrest, and her ankles were securely bound with stained white ropes. She spent the night there, in silence, without water, without answers, just listening to footsteps upstairs and muffled laughter. Early in the morning, interrogations began. One of the men came down with a knife with a curved blade. "I didn't want to kill her yet, just press on." The questions revolved around the brothers' whereabouts, contact names, and phone numbers. Rebecca said she didn't know. The man made superficial cuts on her arms, not to disfigure her, but to remind her that they were willing to continue. The knife was cleaned with a cloth between cuts. When he got tired, he would go up and leave the door padlocked. The ritual was repeated 3 times that day. On the morning of the 9th, something changed. The attacker was more impatient, suspicious that Rebecca really didn't know anything. He went down again, this time more carelessly. The knife was left on a low table next to the chair. Rebecca, even though she was weak, noticed that he was nervous, typing messages on his cell phone and pacing from one side to the other. When he went upstairs to answer a phone call, he left the basement door just ajar. Rebecca waited to hear the footsteps disappear and began an effort that she had already attempted the night before. He dragged the chair millimeter by millimeter with his feet, approaching the table. I couldn't see the knife, but I knew the direction. The contact with the wood was rough, and the ropes hurt his ankles with every movement. After almost 10 minutes of effort, he managed to drop the knife on the floor. It was a dry sound, but not loud enough to attract attention. With his toes, he tried to drag the blade towards him. The cold metal touched the tip of her foot, and she used the heel of her sneaker to stop it. As carefully as possible, he pulled the knife out until it rested against the side of the chair. She used the edge of the blade against the ropes. With each movement, it cut his skin along, but there was no alternative. Tears flowed, mixing pain and despair. When he managed to free one of his hands, the arm didn't respond. He had to massage him with his shoulder until he regained some control. With trembling fingers, he cut the other side and finally freed himself. I was dizzy, dehydrated, weak. But live. Hearing footsteps upstairs, I knew I didn't have time. He took the knife with both hands and hid behind the stairs. When the man opened the cellar door and started going down, Rebecca acted on instinct. He attacked with force, without technique, without thinking. The knife hit the neck and then the chest. They both fell to the ground, she on top, pushing with the little strength she had left. The man tried to scream, but his voice was lost in the stuffy basement. Rebecca ran to the front door of the house. It was locked, but the windows had cracks. He used a piece of broken wood to open the way and managed to escape through a hole in the side of the structure. She ran for about 3 blocks before collapsing on the sidewalk, where she was seen by a resident hailing a taxi. The woman called emergency services. Rebecca was taken to hospital with injuries to her arms, legs and clear signs of dehydration. The police began an investigation, but Rebecca refused to give names. He said he didn't know the kidnappers, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding. Within the community, few believed that the story would end there. After recovery, Rebecca disappeared. She left the city and was never seen in Ciudad Juarez again. But in the alleys, in the dark drug corridors, many still remember her. Not because of the pain, but because of the unexpected reaction. She was the woman who, even tortured, even scarred, found a second of opportunity and turned it into survival. Because sometimes even the most fragile victims manage to break the cycle and face hell itself. Story number 3, Tijuana, 2020. On the night of October 3, 2020, a man named Raul Esteban disappeared leaving a bar in Tijuana, Baja California. He had worked for years as a private driver for one of the intermediary leaders of the cartel that controlled part of the smuggling route in that region. He was not a well-known name, but within the structure of the organization, Raul carried a strategic role. He knew alternative routes, he knew which police points were most fragile and which times were safest to move cargo. Everything was following the pattern that Raul had accepted as his reality, until, in September of that year, a shipment of weapons valued at more than 2 million pesos was intercepted by federal agents. The convoy had been assembled silently, with 3 armored vehicles transporting the material between the cartel depot and a warehouse near the border. It was an important and supposedly discreet operation. The police action was quick, precise and error-free. 2 vehicles were blocked before they even reached their destination. The third escaped, but only for a few minutes. Almost all of the occupants were killed in the confrontation. The only person who came out alive and unharmed was Raul Esteban. The cartel didn't need proof. The fact that he was alive was enough. Behind the scenes, distrust grew. Some said Raul had cooperated with the feds, providing information in exchange for immunity. Others believed he had been coerced, or that he was just left out due to bad luck. But in that world, survivors were rarely seen as innocent. On the morning of the 3rd, Raul was intercepted as he left home. A car without license plates blocked the street, and 4 armed men forced it into the trunk. The disappearance was not reported, no one called the police, and the neighbors pretended not to see. In the neighborhood where he lived, silence was the only possible protection. Raul was taken to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a windowless concrete house, with an unfinished structure and surrounded by tall grass. There, the cartel's improvised cells and torture rooms for those who needed to be accounted for. He was chained to an iron pipe attached to the wall of what would one day be a laundry room. The floor was made of thick cement, cracked and dirty. There were dark spots everywhere. The space smelled of mold, rust and sweat. During the first 2 days, Raul didn't hear any questions. He just caught it. He was fed cold leftover food, given sips of water and remained in the dark. The attacks were carried out with wooden handles, pieces of iron and slaps with the open palm of the hand, always to the face. The attackers said little, just repeating that he knew too much, that someone had spoken, and that the answer needed to come soon. On the afternoon of the third day, a new man appeared. He wore clean clothes, his face uncovered, and he carried a recorder in his pocket. He started asking questions. He wanted names, details, times, proof that Raoul had not participated in delivering the information. Raoul denied everything. He said he didn't know, that he only drove, that he was loyal. But in that world, the word of someone captured was worth little. The interrogator returned 3 times, each time more impatient. On one of the visits, after receiving no answers, he placed a knife against Raoul's arm and lightly passed the blade across the skin, leaving a superficial scratch. He said that the next day the cut would be deeper. During the early hours of the 4th day, an error occurred. One of the younger men, in charge of guarding the captivity, was tired and distracted. When he searched Raoul's backpack again, he found a lighter hidden between the seams of the inner lining. The object was left on a pile of rags and was not taken away. Raoul saw the lighter in the corner of the room when the young man walked away. It was a minimal opportunity, but it was all he had. With his feet, he tried to slowly pull the lighter out, dragging it across the floor. Every inch gained took minutes. After more than half an hour of effort, he managed to secure it between his feet. The chains that held him had a makeshift rope knot at the back, reinforced with industrial plastic. Raoul used the lighter to slowly heat the point where the rope joined, melting the material little by little. The smoke was almost imperceptible, and the smell was confused with the odors of the environment itself. When he finally managed to free one of his hands, he fell to the floor, tired and panting. Breathing was heavy, vision was blurred. But there was still one more step. In the small abandoned kitchen, he found a forgotten bottle of cleaning alcohol, along with some dirty cloths. He wet one of them, rolled it up like a fuse and prepared a simple trap, placing the cloth behind the door of the room where 2 of the kidnappers were sleeping. Around 5 in the morning, he lit the cloth and threw it against the wood. The fire spread quickly, igniting part of the curtain and generating a thick smoke screen. The screams came within seconds, and with them, the confusion. Raoul ran around the side of the house, through the bushes, fell twice while escaping, but didn't stop. With his hands cut and his feet bare, he crossed a busy avenue until he was helped by a taxi driver who was washing his car before his morning shift. He was taken to hospital with burns on his hands, bruises on his body and a deep cut on his leg. The doctors reported the case to the police, who kept minimal records. No one was arrested, no one was questioned. Raoul remained in the hospital for 12 days. When he was discharged, he disappeared. Some say he was taken by authorities and placed in a protection program. Others claim that it was hidden by the cartel itself, as a way of silencing it. Today, her story is told in whispers in Tijuana, not as an example of justice, but as a warning. Not every execution ends as planned, and sometimes, even the most unlikely ones find a way out at the right time. That night, Raoul escaped not because he was strong, but because the carelessness of a man and the presence of a lighter changed the fate that seemed sealed.